All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for those who are listening on the replay. This month's community mental health education workshop is Bouncing Back from Burnout, a burnout and stress management workshop for Black women, presented by me, Ashley C. Whiteside, LMSW, founder, curator, and clinician of Altruistic Ash. So the objectives for our workshop today, we have 3 objectives that we are going to be centering our conversation today around. The first of which being identifying signs and symptoms of stress and burnout. We're going to secondly recognize what the burnout cycle looks like, and then we'll identify stress management tools and techniques to continue to put into our toolbox for when we're having those times when we're feeling stressed out and burnt out. But first, hi, my name is Ashley. I use they, she, and beloved pronouns from altruisticash.co. I co-create safe spaces for Black and Brown folks to heal in community together. And I'm fueled by my charge to help Black femmes achieve embodied authenticity by providing a safe space to transform their pain and hurt into their power, pleasure, and healing. I do this by offering one-to-one therapy, group programs, community educational events like this one that you're watching here. All right. So for those who are with us here, please drop it in the chat. And for those who are with us watching on the replay, just take a moment with me to ground down while we do a personal check-in. So get comfortable in your seat, wherever that is, adjusting. If it's possible and comfortable for you to put both feet flat on the floor. Take a couple of deep breaths here. Grounding down, feeling your energy in your body. Taking a moment to ask yourself, how are you feeling today? What are the feeling or emotion words that are coming up for you? Then, what is a goal that you would like to accomplish this week? This can be a personal goal, a professional goal, a relational goal, something you want to do around the house, get together with friends, one thing that you want to do and get done this week. Next, I want you to think about who are the people in your life who can support you this week. Again, professionally, personally. It might be a colleague, a friend, a family member. And lastly, what is something that you'll do to practice self-care? One thing that you are actively choosing to do to take care of yourself today. All right. Okay, so you see me jetting my eyes off here. I have my notes on my second screen, so forgive me. But let's get started. So first and foremost, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's get some basic definitions and understandings of the terms that we're going to be using throughout the rest of our workshop today. First and foremost, what is stress? What is stress? When you think about the word stress, when the word stress comes to mind, what are the things that come up for you in terms of thoughts, behaviors, or maybe even sensations in your body? What is it? What is stress, right? I feel like stress is something that's so common that we all feel and that we all can identify with, but aren't 100% clear on what it actually is. So a very simple definition is stress can be defined as a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation, right? So a state of worry or mental tension caused by a situation. So there's something externally happening, and our response causes us a space of worry or tension. I think it's really important to note that stress is a natural human response, right? Everybody stresses. Everybody has things that stresses them. Everybody can experience being stressed out. And the stress that we have prompt us to address our challenges and the threats that we have in our lives. Again, everyone experiences stress to some level or degree. And stress isn't necessarily something that's always explicitly negative. We typically talk about stress in terms of getting to the space of feeling burdened and overwhelmed, but there are also stressors that can be as a result of positive situations. For example, you got a really big promotion and you at work and you're stepping into your new role at work. That's something that may cause tension or maybe a little bit of worry and anxiety, but it's something that you're willingly taking on and you feel excited about. Right? So stress is felt when an individual perceives a real or imagined challenge or threat to their well-being. So I think it's really important here to highlight perceives. And this is what makes stress so challenging for folks to identify and define. For one person going through a particular type of situation, they may find it to be exceptionally stressful and being like, I just can't deal. This is too much. I feel stressed out. A similar person going through a similar or the same situation can be able to be like, you know what? It's not that bad. Yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but I'm able to move through it and get through it. So stress is really based on an individual's perception and why individuals who are going through similar experiences don't always necessarily have the same response. Okay. So very often in our community, in our culture, people will use the words stress interchangeably with anxiety or feeling anxious, feel fearful, nervous, overwhelmed, panic, stressed out, too much, I can't deal. Like these are all words that folks use to describe stress and what it feels like to be stressed out. Okay. So when it comes down to stress, there are three types of stress. Okay. We have acute stress, episodic stress, and chronic stress. Acute stress doesn't mean like it's a little cute stress, but acute meaning that the stress is usually brief. The most common, this is the most common type of stress that we have in terms of it's very common and it happens frequently. And this is where we get our responses for our fight or flight. So acute stress are things that happen in normal everyday life that will bring us out of a state of our baseline to get us to react. Again, those things can be positive, negative, or neutral. It doesn't necessarily have to be polarized as all negative. The threat can be real or imagined. The perception of the threat that triggers the stress response can activate what's called our fight or flight responses. This is when our bodies divest or take energy away from our extremities, from unnecessary bodily processes to prepare the body to be able to respond to the perceived threat, which is something that could be real, something standing right in front of us, or an internal response or feeling or perception. What that can look like for folks in terms of physical knowing, sometimes our vision can get tunneled. For most folks, they will have a rapid increase in their heart rate. They may get really sweaty. They may start to have digestive challenges. They may start to hyper focus or fixate on very specific things. And the reason why our body does this is because evolutionarily, back in the day when we were with the lions, tigers, and bears, we really had to be able to make split-second decisions about, are we safe? And if not, how do we get to safety, right? And this is kind of boiled down to our fight or flight responses. So our bodies shut down or deactivate unnecessary body processes so that way it can prepare us to be able to activate and have some sort of action to move forward. The challenge is our brain doesn't recognize the difference between a lion or a bear in front of us, or being embarrassed by a situation, or having a moment in which energetically or emotionally we feel like we are at risk or vulnerable. So that is an acute stress. And again, these don't necessarily have to be traumatic, but an example of that is when you're sleeping and you have an alarm clock and your alarm clock goes off. Initially, that is something that when it surprises you will maybe jolt you out of your sleep, or you'll kind of like hop up out of bed. In that moment, it takes us up from our base level of arousal, our base level of existing and being, to a point where we can activate and get our needs met. And then eventually what happens is we'll come back down, right? That's usually what happens and how the arc of us should go when we have stress. Next, moving on from acute stress is when we have episodic stress. So episodic stress is when we have these episodes of acute stress that happen frequently over time. So this is our baseline, and where we usually would be able to go up and come back down with whatever's going on throughout our day. We're having these situations happen in close succession where, okay, maybe this is like where a new baseline is, and it's leaving us less space to be able to react and respond in ways that feel authentic and genuine and bring us back to a space of feeling comfortable and safe. Okay. So for folks that have episodic stress, you may start to get to being in places of chronic irritability. There may also be lashing out or projecting feelings or emotions or frustrations onto other folks in your life. Lastly, there is chronic stress. So chronic stress is where we're going to lead into and starting to talk about burnout. So chronic stress is the most harmful type of stress. So where acute stress happens in a moment and you're kind of able to ride the wave through the moment, when where episodic stress is riding for these moments that last longer, but eventually come back down, right? Where you have chronic stress, you kind of just go up and you keep going up and you keep going up and keep going up until there is nowhere else to go. And inevitably we reach a space of burnout. So chronic stress is when you have acute episodic stress happening for a long period of time. And again, what may be a long period of time for one person could be shorter duration for another. There is no solid definition or timeline of, okay, if it happens for 1 month, then you have chronic stress. So it really is different and it's individualized and dependent on each person. So again, when we get into these spaces of chronic stress and really getting to the point of feeling like there is nothing that you can do to shift or change where the trajectory of where you're going, this is when we get into burnout. So, what is burnout? Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic stress that has not been successfully managed. It is characterized by 3 dimensions: exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So when it comes to exhaustion, this is really talking about the fatigue that happens both mentally and physically. There is this feeling of just not being able to get enough time, enough space, enough energy to be to just deal with what's going on in the facts of life. So typically the energy that you have is consistently burnt and spent quicker. So you can think about this in terms of like a car and gas mileage. So when you have a car that gets really good gas mileage, you know, okay, I can drive 200 miles on my car and I get some really good gas mileage, and this is what I can come to expect. When we're feeling burnt out instead of getting 200 miles with the same amount of gas, maybe we're only getting 100. Maybe we're getting half of that. Maybe we're getting less than half of that. Maybe we can only get 50 miles. So it's this feeling of like, you just don't have enough energy to be able to maintain getting to the destination that you need to with the energy that you have available. Second, we have depersonalization. So this is just a really, really big fancy word for feeling indifferent, feeling like I don't care, feeling numb, feeling like there's nothing that you can do. If left unchecked, this can really lead to feelings of being hopeless or helpless and just feeling like there's nothing else available. This sometimes can look externally to other folks as being hyperly critical or very cynical or very like a Debbie Downer and things of that nature. But really, it's the ability that you feel like this lack of impact or this lack of being able to do anything that makes a difference or changes the circumstances or situations in which you're in. Yeah, that was complete. So next, and lastly, there's the reduced sense of personal accomplishment or achievement. So this tends to manifest in work specifically of feeling insufficient or feeling incapable or incompetent of being able to complete out your duties. So the things that you would normally give yourself credit for, which specifically for Black women is very limited and few and far between, anywho, you're not even acknowledging those things that you can have the opportunity to acknowledge for yourself. So the things that you may have celebrated, like completing a project, signing a new client, getting a raise, like these things don't carry the same amount of weight and joy that they used to when they were available to you previously. Okay. So that is conceptualizing the core components of burnout. So when it comes to feeling burnout, I think it's really, really helpful for us to identify symptoms that we can point out in ourselves and others, whether those be physical, emotional, or behavioral. So some of the physical symptoms of burnout are feeling tired or restless, experiencing a change in appetite, meaning that you're very hungry or insatiably hungry and you're eating all the time, or a decrease in appetite in which you are not eating as much, not having hunger cues. And this, as a result, can mean to rapid weight loss, syncopathy, which is fainting, and things of that nature. There also may be a change in general body pains, ache, general malaise, which is just feeling kind of, just whole body feeling kind of bland. Oftentimes for folks that are chronically in the space of burnout, they will have gastrointestinal issues, whether that be bloating, gas, food sensitivity, lack of bowel movements, or too many bowel movements. This can also manifest itself into ulcers within the GI tract as well, or high blood pressure or elevated blood pressure that may be outside of your norm. If you're experiencing any of these physical symptoms and they are bringing you any amount of discomfort, please go and check in with your primary care physician to rule out any other causes other than stress, just to make sure that everything is good and that you can continue on in a space of wellness. All right, so some emotional symptoms of burnout can this lack of motivation, this lack of inability to get started, this lack of inability to complete tasks, feeling very foggy, feeling unfocused, feeling like I really just don't want to do it or I don't care. This can also lead to feelings of self-doubt or low self-worth. Oftentimes when folks are burnt out, the first thing that kind of goes is in turn with the depersonalization is this over fixation and emphasis on what we can and can't do. And that may lead to folks, especially Black women, really get into the space of like, well, if I just try harder, then I should be able to do it. Or if I just keep going, or, if I just kept trying or pushed like this or said this or talked to this person, then things will change. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And that can lead to this internalization of feeling like I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I can't do it, because there's this level of if I can do and I can achieve, then it'll be well. And that doesn't necessarily always directly correlate. Okay. And then lastly, having these overall or general feelings of being overwhelmed and feeling like there's so much and not enough at the same time. There's also this feeling of dissatisfaction, general mehness is how I've heard folks describe it previously as well. And this frustration and being like, it's not working. And because of maybe other external circumstances, not really seeing additional options or choices available to be able to make different decisions. Okay. Okay. Some behavioral symptoms of burnout. So this is something that I wanted to mention because some folks, because of how we are socialized to work, because of cultural expectations, whether explicit or implicit, we may not necessarily even recognize burnout in ourselves before other people can start to see some of those signs and symptoms. And some of the behavioral symptoms are the ones that are most clear and evident to folks around you to be able to start to point out what those things are. Obviously, none of these are exhaustive lists, but these are some of the things that you might see from someone who's burnt out. They may tend towards social isolation. So decreased community time, not really reaching out as much as they used to, canceling things that that you've done routinely or habitually, not going to church or not going to extracurriculars or things that they may have previously enjoyed, avoiding certain tasks, people, or situations, whether that is by not going into work or not calling people back or turning their phones off. So that could also look like social isolation as well. And then lastly, inappropriate outbursts towards others. So this is what we call projection. This is maybe when folks are lashing out or they're projecting their feelings onto other people that may not necessarily be experiencing the same things at that point in time. So when someone is burnt out, these are behaviors that are more likely to happen in the process of just feeling burnt crispy crisp. All right. One of the things I wanted to mention before moving on from the slide is how common burnout is. So I pulled up some stats and it says that 59% of American workers are experiencing moderate to high levels of burnout. So 60% of the workforce, 6 out of 10 people, which is more than, it's 2 out of every 3 people, just about. I'm stretching my statistics here, but 2 out of every 3 people are saying that they are experiencing moderate to high levels of burnout. That's a lot of people. And the increase of that is from 51% in 2021, just a year previously due to this specific study. And there was this survey was completed as well in 2020, and they were saying that we are reaching the levels of burnout that we had during the height of the 2020 pandemic, which says a lot because there are so many conditions that have shifted and changed since that very restrictive time that you would think that things would be getting better and that we would be making more accommodations in the ways in which we were previously, but it very much so shows that we have not. There's also this stats that said that mental health has negatively affected job performance of nearly 40% of the US workers in the past year, which has almost increased by about 15% from the year previously. So people are getting burnt out. people are struggling. People are having a really, really, really hard time. And unfortunately, our systems, the ways in which they had adjusted maybe during the pandemic, haven't sustained the changes necessary to be able to support workers and support people and not getting back to these spaces of being severely burnt out. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about before we get into the burnout cycle and we actually talk about what that cycle looks like, I want to give some grounding information on stress, burnout, and depression, because oftentimes these words are used interchangeably and they are a little bit different, but they definitely lead and feed into one another. So stress can be characterized, for the sake of this conversation, as having too much on our plate. So too much work, too many responsibilities, too many hours spent doing specific things. Burnout can in some ways feel like the opposite. It's like there is so much that I just don't have enough, right? So stress is this feeling of having too much and trying. And burnout is just reaching this place of apathy and being like, I don't got it. I don't got it. So you don't have enough motivation, energy, care, F's to give, any of that, right? And also, consequently, it's very, very common that depression is misinterpreted as burnout and burnout is misinterpreted as depression. And it kind of, while they definitely feed into one another, there are some very distinct differences. Certainly, depression-related symptoms such as exhaustion, difficulty completing tasks can masquerade as burnout, but burnout is typically work-related and doesn't have an impact outside of the workforce. So when we have conversations around burnout, it's typically around career, work, jobs, and things of that sort. Outside of that, their regular or their whole life, the rest of their life is impacted in some ways, but not necessarily in a larger aspect of that. Depression, on the other hand, or like the clinical definitions of depression as outlined in the DSM and working with clients, this is something that impacts every aspect of your life. So work, family, community, other activities of daily living, you consistently are in this space of hopelessness, worthlessness, and helplessness. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the burnout cycle. So how do we get to burnout? What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Because for most folks who take on jobs, hopefully there's some level of excitement or joy or reason that you're taking on this new endeavor, right? So at first we have the honeymoon phase. So just like when you're in a relationship or after you get married, there's this stage that is like the honeymoon phase. And you're like, okay, like things are pretty good. I'm not where I was and not with so-and-so or whatever situation it was. So you have a lot of energy and optimism. It's common to experience like this level of satisfaction that leads to periods of productivity that may have been different from your previous position, right? So this honeymoon phase is kind of like, okay, like it's hope. It's feeling very hopeful and wishful that things are going to be different or better than the last time. Next, you have this onset of stress phase. So not every single day of your work is stressful, but maybe there are definitely times or people or specific situations where it feels more stressful than most. And you can start to begin to take notice of these things physically, mentally, emotionally, and how they kind of play out for you throughout the day, right? Typically, this is where we're starting to see like some fatigue or just kind of like you're still in it, but it's definitely like the sense of like, I guess the shininess is worn off. You're like, I guess this isn't as great as I may have thought it was, but we're still here and we're still committed. Then you get to the space of the chronic stress phase. So when you reach the chronic stress phase, you are in the state of consistent and persistent stress, right? The pressure feels like it mounts and it typically impacts your ability to work and get done the things that you need to get done. There may be mistakes in your work, or maybe you're able to mask it, but behind the scenes, it is just taking a disproportionate toll on your mental, physical, and emotional health. After the chronic stress phase, this is when we actively get into burnout. So this is when you have reached your limit and you just can't do what you used to do in the way in which you did it before. This is kind of where you get a case of the efforts, where you might have apathy and you're just like, I don't care, like it's not that deep, whatever. Like you can kind of get into this point where you get really, really consumed, that to the point where you feel numb and you check out and you're kind of like, you know what? I'm just here to collect my check. I just need to do whatever I need to do to get to Monday to Friday so I can get to my weekend and then get from Monday to Friday again. Once you're in the phase of burnout, typically what happens is jobs don't create spaces for burnout recovery. So what ends up happening is we go through this honeymoon phase, we go through this onset of stress, we kind of start ramping up and we're in this chronic stress phase where things get really, really hard. And then we get to this burnout phase. And instead of taking a pause and taking a break to be able to reassess and provide tools and resources for the individual that is feeling burnt out, you kind of just, they say, take a mental health day, and it's just not enough, because it doesn't change the circumstances and the situation that led to the burnout in the first place, right? Which is why I think it's really, really important to recognize the habitual burnout phase, which is this untreated burnout becoming just a part of your everyday life, which can eventually lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, self-doubt, low self-worth, and can further deteriorate mental health and physical health. Okay. So now that we know what it is, let's talk about recovery. Let's talk about what can you do to change the circumstances and situations that are available. What are the things and what are the tools that we can add to our toolbox to be able to support us? First, identifying sources of stress and building a personal awareness. So one of the things that I think is really, really important for us is identifying our baseline. So before we took the job, before we had these things to do, even if we're on vacation for periods of time, or maybe during our weekends, where do you currently feel like the most comfortable? It might be helpful to rank this on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 being very low energy, very like low, to 10 being very high energy. I don't like to give a lot of description because it can mean different things to different people, but you recognizing where you're at along your own scale is what's going to be the most important. So recognizing the difference between your 4 and your 8 is different than recognizing an absolute 4 or an absolute 8 along this scale and this continuum. So identify for yourself, what is your baseline? Where are you currently? Being real and honest with yourself, and where you would like to be ideally, right? So for example, I'm a pretty naturally high energy person. Comfortably on a good day, I like to be at like a 7 or an 8. And so for myself, that feels really good. And there was a season of life where it was just really, really tough and challenging. And I constantly found myself at like a 2, 3, and 4, which did not feel comfortable to me. And it took time to be able to recognize, okay, this is where I am, but I don't have to stay here. So what are the tools that I can use to get from a 2 and a 3 to a 7 and an 8? Okay. Next, we have stress tracking. So you can track your stress using apps or journals. And really the thing that's important is to record your stress levels and triggers throughout the day. Again, you can use a 0 to 10 scale because that's usually pretty simple. If you have like an Apple Watch, the newer Apple Watches allow you to do stress tracking throughout the day, and they are monitoring your heart rate and your respiration rate and coming up with this system to be able to give you identifications around your stress. Other wearable watches or electronic watches also have apps and things that you can use in tandem with that as well. So first thing you need to do is figure out a way to record and gather the information and data. Secondly, you'll want to pay attention to the physical symptoms of stress that manifest when you feel like your stress is higher than when it is lower. So for some people, stress can manifest as overeating. Sometimes it can be not eating at all. Sometimes it can impact their sleep greatly to the point where they're not sleeping, or sometimes that they feel like they just can't get enough sleep and they're just sleeping all the time. So realizing for you, what are the ways that you kind of divest and shift away from what feels natural, normal, and comfortable to your body and well-being because of the stress levels that you have. Third, you'll want to identify patterns and common triggers for stress and develop coping strategies, tools, rhythms, and systems, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to support you from those places. So it's like, okay, every time I have a conversation with my boss, the whole morning leading up to it, I feel really, really anxious. I feel really, really stressed out. I feel really, really worried. And so that is a point in a moment that I can use as an opportunity to be like, okay, I am going to practice some deep breathing skills. I'm going to practice some mindfulness and grounding. I'm going to go get a coffee with my coworker in the morning, so I have a moment of connection with a familiar face. And those are the ways that you can proactively start to help yourself move through those moments of stress and at a pace where it's lower than what the height of it could be. Next, like I mentioned, you'll want to use mindfulness techniques such as deep breathing or meditation to manage stress in the moment, and continue to make lifestyle changes to support that. So for some folks, that may look like changing their hours, for some folks, it looks like changing their jobs. Some people, they're changing their industries or their whole entire type of work, or relocating geographically. And again, like for some folks, because of the realities of this world, because of the obligations and the choices that they've chosen, sometimes like there are things that are available to people, and sometimes there are things that are not. And that's just, let's call a spade, right? So I think it's really, really important to recognize and to acknowledge and call that out. But definitely make changes and incorporate the things that you can to help you better cope with and mitigate the stress that you're currently having. Lastly, and a kind of tandem with this, we want to identify the fallout from stress. So what are the things that change? What are the ways in which your behaviors, your thoughts, your habits, your routines are changed when you're stressed out versus when you feel optimally well? Are you a person who likes to have a face routine that you do every day, that when you're stressed out, you barely wash your face or brush your teeth? No tea, no shade, but like acknowledge and call it what it is, right? And that's a part of you being able to acknowledge, okay, when I start slipping on these couple of things, this is how quickly we can fall down the rabbit hole and what it looks like. Okay. All right. Self-care. This is the buzzword of the 2020s, I guess is the decade that we're in. So this importance of self-care, right? When we talk about self-care, we're talking about having a conversation of what are the things that you need that you can give yourself on a regular and routine basis so that you can support a general level of well-being. I use that definition of self-care versus saying going and getting XYZ or insert thing here, because again, this is something that's so individualized and personal. And one thing that can work really, really well for one person can be trivial to another, right? So emotional regulation and coping skills. Okay. Emotional regulation describes a person's ability to effectively manage and respond to an emotional experience. So emotional regulation is being able to feel things, and instead of reacting right to the feeling that's happening in the moment, be able to say, okay, why am I feeling like this? Where's this feeling coming from? Getting curious about the feeling and being able to meet the feeling where the feeling is at, versus being in a space of feeling like I have to act on every feeling or thought too, in the intensity and in the moment in which is coming to me. Next, we also have coping skills. So coping skills are strategies, tools, and techniques that we can use for psychological, mental, emotional, and energetic responses to stress. I have a whole nother workshop and training that's already previously available if you want more information on developing and trying out coping skills and developing your own coping skills plan. But For today, we will talk about the importance of breathing. Deep breathing can be so powerful, and it's very, very, very often misinterpreted, not thought about, misused, or misunderstood. Breathing is one of the only things that we can do at any moment, at any given time, regardless of our circumstances, situations. We can breathe. And it's one thing that, even though it does happen primarily automatically, we can also control, right? So deep breathing can activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. Can also help you to regulate our emotions by promoting relaxation and a sense of calm. In the body, it can release oxygen, which can improve our ability to think clearly and overall general well-being. So one of the breathing techniques that I find to be extraordinarily powerful is the square breath. So the square breath is inhaling for a count of 5, holding for a count of 5, and then exhaling for a count of 5 and holding for a count of 5. So that is something that we will just take 3 short breaths and we are going to practice together. And the goal of this is to breathe as deeply as you can into your belly and less so into your chest. So we'll just take 3 breaths here. You can again get grounded in your seat in a way that feels good and comfortable for you. You can leave your eyes open or you can close them if you feel safe enough to do so. If you choose to leave them open, just focus on something in front of you that's not moving. So we'll start our breathing with an exhale out for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then we'll take a fresh inhale here for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And breathe normally. How do you feel? Yeah. Doing a quick body scan after we practice breathing is something that is really helpful for when you're in these moments of stress, to remind yourself, remind your body, when we practice and we use our tools, this is what's available to us on the other side of that. So I wish you to continue exploring using breath as a practice. And even if you're unable to use any other skills, just taking some deep breaths for 1 minute. All right. Our second tool in our toolbox is communication and setting boundaries. For a lot of us, the space of burnout and feeling overwhelmed can come from the things that we take on our plate. Hope sometimes gleefully, sometimes by obligation or expectation from others, but all these things nonetheless. So it's really, really important for us to, one, be able to ask and receive help, right? It's really, really important for us to be able to get to a place where we're able to get the help that we need, right? There is nothing wrong with asking for help. That doesn't make you weak. That doesn't make you less than, doesn't make it that you're not capable. It doesn't mean that you're not strong. Asking for help is just being able to use the tools and the resources that you have at your disposal to be able to get your needs met and get done the things that you need to get done. We all need help from time to time. We all do. It's just the fact of life. It is what it is. Okay. So I encourage you to continue in the places that it feels safe and comfortable for you to do so, for ask for help. And that can be as simple as, hey, can you take this to the garbage when you go over there, to as big as, can you help me out with my kids? Can you help me out with this big assignment or this big project? Then we have saying no and setting boundaries. Again, whole nother workshop that we have exploring this particular topic, but really for yourself, starting to identify and honor what are the things that you just don't have space, capacity, bandwidth, F's to give for, and being able to claim and take back that energy and put it into spaces, places, and things that feel good and feel aligned for you. All right. So, what do you need to say no to make space for yourself in your life? What are all the things that are a higher priority than you on your own to-do list that are not explicitly needed or necessary from you, or things that you just don't want to do? How can we start putting some of those things down and taking them off of our plates so that way we can make space for ourselves and to do the things that we need to do to take care of us? Think about it. Take time. Explore that for you. Next, we have mindful self-compassion. When we talk about self-compassion, we are talking about that internal dialogue. We're talking about that internal voice, or speaking, the way in which we speak to ourselves from a place of our insides, right? Sometimes folks can recognize this as a dialogue that happens in their brain. Sometimes people can recognize it as a as maybe like a voice of someone who they used to know. But how can we be kind and continue to extend ourselves some grace and self-compassion? A note on grace. Grace is the ability to give yourself a break, some leeway, kindness, to be able to say, it's okay. Grace is something, especially for Black women, that we are quick to give others, whether that be friends, colleagues, kids, partners, etc. It's very easy for us to be understanding and compassionate to the plight and the struggles of other folks. However, when it comes to ourselves, we have these expectations that are so unbelievably high that when we're not able to meet them, when we're not able to achieve them, when we're not able to consistently work or output or achieve at that level, that there becomes this personalized sense of I'm not enough and I'm not good enough, which can very easily tunnel down into this space of just beating ourselves up and not being very kind or compassionate to ourselves. So when we talk about grace and we talk about self-compassion, it's really being able to analyze and be like, what is this internal dialogue that's going on? What is it saying? What are we doing? And is this what I authentically want to believe about myself? And if that feels really, really challenging for you to do, I even encourage you to remove yourself from it and say, if someone else heard this, if my friend told me that somebody was saying these things about her to her, what would I say? Or what would another person say if they heard the internal dialogue? And not to bring about a space of shame, but to bring about or invite in more self-compassion and being like, oh, I think I could be kinder to myself. I probably could say nicer things, or I probably could interact and engage with myself in another more meaningful and kind way. And it's something that takes time. It's something that definitely takes time to be able to shift and change and transition, because you may have been existing and doing these things for years and years and years. So don't have the expectation that they'll just switch overnight. It's going to take time and it's going to take practice. And that's okay. That's okay, fam. All right. When it comes to mindful self-compassion, I got 2 questions that I love, 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 love. It's, what do I need? And what do I have capacity for? These 2 questions can bring you a long way in life. And definitely when we're talking about a self-care journey, or really being able to accurately give ourselves what we need moment to moment, day to day. These are the 2 questions that we have that I always ask folks who I work with to come back to. What do I need? It seems like a really simple question, but also it can be very, very loaded. And again, that need can be something as simple as a physiological need, like, oh, I need to go use the bathroom. Like, oh, I need to eat something because I'm feeling hungry, to something interdependent, like, oh, I really need to talk to so and so. Like, I really miss them. They've really been on my mind and on my heart. To something that's very practical. I really need to clean up my desk so I can feel like I have a clear workspace when I sit down to work. I really need to do some laundry because I'm about to run out of underwear to wear tomorrow. And that's something that's a problem, right? So the needs don't necessarily have to be any one particular thing or particular category. It's, what do you need? And I encourage folks to ask themselves that question moment to moment throughout the day, and being able to help them continue to prioritize themselves and giving themselves what they need moment to moment. Next, it's, what do I have capacity for? Sometimes for folks, when you ask, what do I need? It can be 1 or 2 things, and then that's it, and they're able to execute that. Sometimes that list can be a laundry list, or it can be a list that's a mile long. So then from there, you can start to say, okay, out of the things that I need, what do I actually have capacity for? What can I do? What can I take action on in this moment that can help shift the energy in the space for me? Sometimes we need a vacation. Sometimes we need a break, a rest, or reprieve. Sometimes we need a change of scenery. Sometimes we need a new job. Sometimes we need a new house or environment. Sometimes we need new people in our lives. And sometimes we're not able to take immediate action on those things for a myriad of different reasons. However, when you look at your list, what are the things that you can control? What are the things that you can change? What are the things that you do have dominion over in your life? And can you take a meaningful step of action towards completing that in this moment? Or can you plan for that in the future? Right? So that is why these 2 questions are so impactful and so important. And I really believe that these are 2 questions that if you keep them in your toolbox, if you keep them in your back pocket, that coming back to them over and over will, 1, help you be able to better identify what you need moment to moment and communicate it to other people as well, to ask for that support, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then also being able to realize that the ways, whether those be in large or small ways, that you can learn to meet your needs as well. Okay. Awesome. So we made it, baby. That is our time for today. I'm so excited. For those of you who have joined us in the real time, I will pause the recording here after I show the next slide, so that way folks can ask their questions live if they don't want to be recorded. For folks that are watching the replay of this, you can comment on the video down below. But thank you all so much for being here and learning and experiencing this with us in real time and in the ether, for those who are going to be seeing this soon, and as for all the time to come in the future. I am so excited. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, prioritizing your self-care and seeking support when you need it is a boss lady move. You got this. And if there's anything else that you need, any other questions, comments, concerns, queries, qualms, conundrums, or testimonials, I have my contact information there, which is my website and my email. Feel free to reach out, and I hopefully will be seeing you very soon. Later.